Alright, welcome everyone to another coffee tasting. I'm your host, Aaron Taylor, and today we are doing another exciting coffee tasting. Today we are tasting the Guatemala El Injerto Bourbon blend, and, well, not blend, single origin actually. And with this coffee we are getting notes of sherbet and buttery milk chocolate. This is a really good cup of coffee, and these beans are supplied to us by Stumptown, one of my favorite coffee suppliers. Lots of single origin coffees, and what's cool about the single origin coffees is that we get to explore small regions of the world. We get to learn about the farmers, learn about how they impact their environment, how they create a sustainable livelihood, and then just learn their stories so that we can better appreciate the cup of coffee that we're drinking in our hands. So, perfect. For those of you guys who are joining me for the first time, welcome. It is an honor to have you. And for those of you returning, welcome back. It is an honor that you would return and learn more about coffee. So for those of you who are new to the channel, I like to brew my coffee 3 different ways. The reason why we brew our coffee 3 different ways is so that we can explore the different flavor notes that we get from the coffee. And so each different brew method is going to have a different grind setting, different amount of water, and a different grind portion. And so that is going to impact the flavor of our coffee. So that is why we taste our coffee 3 different ways, is so that we can explore all the different flavor notes of the coffee that this coffee has to offer. And so with the pour over, we're going to get a little bit more oils and sediment. And with the Chemex, we're going to get a more balanced cup, but it's going to be very clean because of that triple paper filter. And with the French press, we are getting a lot of sediment and a lot of oils, but we're still getting that balanced cup, but it's going to be much more intense in flavor. So when we do a pour over or a Chemex, we want to pour just a little bit of water on top of the grinds, just saturate all the grinds real quick, and then you want to let it bloom. So letting your coffee bloom is very important because what it does is it allows the air that's in between each of the individual grinds to rise to the surface and escape. If we pour too much water on top of our grinds too quickly, we ended up pushing that water, those air bubbles down, and it creates a barrier at the tip of our filter. And what that does, it actually slows down the brewing process. And when you slow down the brewing process, you're causing your coffee to oversteep. And when that happens, you end up with an over-extracted coffee, which tastes too bitter, or sometimes the citrus flavors come out so strong that it has like almost like a chemical flavor to it. And so making sure that we brew our coffee properly is very important to making sure that we get a good flavor cup of coffee, because you might have had a delicious cup of coffee, but it was brewed improperly, causing it to not taste good. And so making sure that we brew our coffee and that we do our brew process and getting the grind and proportion correct is very important to making sure that our cup has the flavor that we want it to have. And also, the second important part about it is, it's paying tribute to the people who grow our coffee. If we mess up on this part of the brew process of the coffee, that coffee has gone through so much work, from the growing process to the harvest process to the wash process, and then the processing, and then the roasting, to get to our table and to be messed up because we improperly brewed our coffee. That's a lot of work to be done to mess up the final product and ruin the flavor of all that hard work. And so making sure that we properly brew our coffee and get those flavors that are intended by the farmers and the roasters, we are paying tribute to the people who put the hard work into making sure that this coffee made it to our table. So with this cup, we are getting a orange sherbet flavor, which is going to be a pretty sweet, bright citrus notes with a buttery milk chocolate. And with the buttery milk chocolate, that's also going to give us a slightly bitter, sweet flavor that's going to have like a nice, thick feeling on our tongue. That's where that buttery sweetness comes from. It's going to have a nice consistency to it. It's going to taste really good. We're going to get different flavor profiles on the pour over versus the Chemex and the French press. And if you guys joined us last week, we tried the El Injerto Bourbon on an iced Chemex, which was really good. If you haven't checked that live stream out, click the link down below. That'll take you directly to that video. Excellent. Alright, so first we are going to try the pour over. And while we taste the pour over, we are going to wait for the Chemex to finish. So the pour over should take around 2.5 to 3 minutes to make. The Chemex should be around 4.5 minutes. And then depending on your brew preference, the French press can be 4 to 5 minutes. So our pour over is a little full. So with the coffee tastings, it comes in pretty much 3 steps. So one of the first things we want to do is we want to go ahead and sniff our coffee, try and get those aromas that are coming off the top. And then after we sniff our coffee, we're going to taste our coffee, and we want it to fully envelop the palate of our tongue so we can get all the flavors. And then after we taste our coffee, we let our palate clear, and then we analyze the flavors that we experienced. So immediately from just the smell, I'm definitely getting that buttery milk chocolate with a hint of citrus. So that's definitely what we're getting right off the bat. It's very nice smelling, really, really, really smooth. That is really good. So we're getting like a nice, subtle, sweet citrus flavor, but we're primarily getting that buttery milk chocolate flavor, and that butteriness is really, really strong in this particular cup of coffee. And that is really good. And so with this, we're getting that sherbet orange sweetness that kind of brightens up the cup of coffee and helps bring out that buttery flavor. It's very interesting. We're really getting a strong butter flavor in the very beginning of the cup with like subtle citrus notes, and then as the palate clears, we get that milk chocolate, but the milk chocolate is very, very subtle. That butteriness really likes to hang on, so we get like a very sweet mouthfeel with this cup of coffee. It's really, really good. I like it a lot, and I'm not very partial to citrus coffees. I'm more of a nutty chocolate coffee. But because those citrus notes aren't so intense, it's a little bit sweeter than actual citrusy. It tastes very good. So now we're going to taste the Chemex. So what's different between the Chemex and the pour over is we have more grinds in the portion, and then the grinds are on a coarser setting, so there's less surface area for the water to brew from. And then at the same time, it has a triple paper filter. So that triple paper filter is going to take a little bit longer for that water to pass through, hence the slightly longer brew time. But it's kind of like a balancing act, because even though there's more brew time, there's less surface area for the grinds to make contact with the water. So there's a balance to make sure that we still get that proper flavor from the coffee so that we're not over steeping our coffee. So even though we have a longer brew time, we have a coarser coffee providing less surface area to brew from, allowing us to maintain that balanced flavor that you want from a cup of coffee. And then because this is a triple paper filter, we are absorbing more oils and not allowing as many sediments to pass through. So it's going to make for a much cleaner cup of coffee as well. So with this, we're automatically getting a lot more of the milk chocolate buttery scent versus the slight citrus notes that we get off the pour over. And that's because there's less oils to sediments in the Chemex, so the oils is what really brings out those bright citrusy notes. Because we're getting more of a balanced cup, it's allowing those milk chocolate notes to be a little bit more predominant. Okay, so with this one, we're not getting as much of a buttery mouthfeel from the very beginning. We are getting a pretty strong citrusy notes right off the bat, but then they give way to the buttery milk chocolate immediately. So we're immediately hit with like a subtle citrus flavor, which is that orange sherbet that we get. And then as that starts to wash away immediately, we're left with that buttery milk chocolate sweetness, and it's really, really pleasant because that orange sweetness dies away really quickly, and then we're left with those milk chocolate notes, which is what I really look for in a good cup of coffee, is a really balanced milk chocolate notes, and this has great milk chocolate notes as the citrus starts to wash away. Really good, really good. It's almost got like a melon flavor too. Very interesting. I like it a lot. The citrus notes aren't so intense as like some of the coffees we try. Sometimes the citrus notes are so intense, um, I'm just not a fan of it. So with this, because the citrus notes are very, very mellow, it's very nice and pleasant, very easy to drink for me at least. So now we have the French press. The French press has the coarsest grind of the three brew methods that you see here, but it has also some of the longest brew time as well. And so it's fully submerged coffee, but because it's a fully submerged coffee for the entire brew process, there's also a balance act going on here because there's an even coarser grind, which is giving us even less of that surface area to deal with. But then also with this, we're getting a lot more sediments and a lot more oil, so it's going to impact the flavor of our coffee. So even though we're not getting as much surface area, we're getting a lot more sediments and a lot more oils. That's going to help us balance out our cup of coffee. We're going to get a very, very balanced flavor, just like we did with the Chemex, but it's going to be turned up in flavor as well because we're getting a lot more sediments and a lot more oils. And so if after we taste this coffee, I'll explain why you would want to choose one or the other. So with the French press, we're immediately getting a lot more of those milk chocolate notes, and that's because we're getting a lot more sediments in the French press than we are in the other ones, and that's going to impact the more bitter flavors that we get in the coffee. And in this case, the milk chocolate notes are the bitter factor in this cup. So the flavor on this cup of coffee on the French press is very similar to the Chemex, where we're getting that initial kick of the citrus flavors, but the citrus flavors is turned up so much more on the French press than on the Chemex. So when we try the Chemex, we're getting a very subtle citrus flavor at the very beginning. We're getting that citrus flavor, but it's very subtle, and then it washes away and we're left with that buttery milk chocolate flavor. With this, it's more of like a citrus kick where we're getting like that strong citrus flavor. It's very, it's like almost like a bite on the side of your tongue. That's how strong the citrus is. So we're getting that strong orange sherbet. And then as that orange sherbet flavor starts to wash away, we're actually getting a really strong butteriness because those strong citrus flavors kind of mask out those milk chocolate notes. Because what I'm experiencing right now is the citrus notes that we got from the orange sherbet are kind of hanging on to the sides of our tongue, kind of giving me a little bit of a dry palate. But because it's holding on to the sides of my tongue, we're not experiencing the chocolate as much as we normally would, but we are still getting that strong buttery flavor. So that milk chocolate flavor is still there, but not as predominant as it was in the Chemex, just because those citrus flavors on the French press are lingering on and holding on to the palate. Very interesting. It's a very intense citrus flavor. It's got that sherbet sweetness for sure, and it's not the same kind of brightness that you would get from like a lime note coffee or a lemon notes. And so with this we're getting a more subtle orange, but then it's slightly bright, so it has a sweeter tone to it, but then at the same time as it washes away we get that honey, sorry, that buttery milk chocolate flavor. That's really good. So, if I were to choose the one method out of these three methods as a favorite for this particular cup of coffee, I would definitely choose the Chemex just because we do get a lot more of those milk chocolate flavors and the citrus notes are much more tame on this one versus the French press. With a French press, we get more of that citrus bite, while this is more of a subtle citrus. And then this, we get that citrus and buttery flavor all together on the pour over, following up with that milk chocolate flavor. But for me, my favorite brew method for the Injerto Bourbon is the Chemex. And so uh, I said I was going to explain why you would choose a Chemex or a French press over the other. And so the main differences between these two is the amount of sediments and oils and then the flavor profile. So they're going to have somewhat similar flavor profile, but it's like kind of like turning the volume up. So I would say like this is kind of like almost like its own music over here or its own band, but they're in the same genre because they come from the same farm. But then these two are kind of like the same soundtrack, but this one is turned up while this one's just on the medium setting. And so that's how I would kind of almost explain the differences in flavors while we have a very loud flavor with the French press, a very mellow flavor with the Chemex, even though they have the same similar flavor profiles, they they range in intensity. And then with the pour over, we're getting completely different flavors because of the different amounts of oil versus sediments kind of outbalance each other and provides us with a different flavor profile versus the other two. And so with the Chemex, we're getting a cleaner cup of coffee. There's less oils and less sediments. And so you might want to choose the Chemex if maybe you're starting to become sensitive to coffee. You know, if you notice that you start to have stomach aches or stomach pains after you drink a cup of coffee or anything like that, it might just mean that you're intaking too much oils and sediments. And so just lowering that can help with those, with just your daily diet. And so that could be one factor. And then another factor is just flavor preference. And so for me, myself, I prefer different brew methods depending on what coffee I'm drinking. And so normally I go for the French press, but this week I actually preferred the Chemex just because we get a little bit more of those chocolate notes. And so depending on the flavor notes that you're looking for in the coffee that you drink is going to uh, it's going to impact the brew method that you should choose for that particular cup of coffee. And so if you're looking for more of a citrus cup, I would definitely go for a pour over every time, because that pour over is going to allow for more of those oils to pass through than the sediments, bringing out some more of those citrus flavors. But if you're looking for more of a balanced cup and you do like a little to taste a little bit more of those bitter flavors, I would definitely go for the French press or the Chemex, just because you get more of a balanced cup, you're getting less of those citrus flavors. That's what I look for in my cup of coffee. But it's all personal preference. So making sure that we all explore the different brew methods is important so that we can learn what our brew preference is, because we don't know until we try it. And so, excellent. So now we're going to learn a little bit about the El Injerto Bourbon coffee from Guatemala. And so this coffee is actually grown by a father-son duo of Arturo Aguirre Sr. and Arturo Aguirre Jr. And they operate this farm in El Injerto. And this farm is actually dedicated to focusing on providing a sustainable environment. And so half of the farm on the El Injerto land is dedicated to providing a wildlife nature preserve. And so they protect the forest and the nature in this area, and make sure that there's no deforestation going on, no hunting and other things like that. So they protect the wildlife and the nature in the area so that the nature can thrive and that they can continue to grow coffee. And so with this particular cup of coffee, it's actually one of the 3 coffee growing regions that isn't surrounded by volcanic soil. And so they have to do a little bit more work into making sure that the soil stays good and nutrient rich for the coffee. And so there's a lot of practices that go on with this area of the coffee growing region, where they put the product back into the ground, like the cherries and the mucilage, and they create more fertile soil to continue to grow in coffee. And that's the important part about the coffee culture, and it creating a more sustainable environment for not just the people but other farmers as well. Because this region of the world in Guatemala, before coffee made a big debut in Guatemala, their major export was indigo dye. And so in the early 1800s, the British created a synthetic dye, and so they no longer needed indigo dye. And so the Guatemalan farmers ended up losing a lot of money by not being able to export their indigo. So a lot of farmers ended up switching over to coffee. And so coffee not is just a staple for sustainable growing of farms in Guatemala, but it also helped revitalize a deteriorating economy because of lack of exports of a crop that that was their primary moneymaker. And so just by switching from indigo to coffee, not only did it help their economy, but it helped the land and creating a more sustainable environment, not just for the farmers, but for wildlife itself. So it's really cool how we can learn about farmers working alongside nature and protecting nature itself so that we can continue to have the green planet that we have. So really cool. And then um, this particular farm has been partnered with Stumptown since 2003. So they have been partners for 18 years. So that's a really long time to, especially in the coffee world, where the coffee world is fairly young. You know, we only have 300, 200 years under our belt of coffee being growing and the culture of really thriving in some parts of this world. And so for 18 years of coffee growing and dedicated to creating a more sustainable environment, is a major feat, and there's a lot of work that goes into it. And so this farm actually gained carbon neutral in 2017, and so they actually have a 0 carbon footprint. So they actually put enough back into the ground and enough back into the environment that they don't make an impact on the environment and the rest of the world. And so and they're even pushing the boundaries and trying to create a negative carbon footprint where their farm actually helps mitigates other things going on in the world. And this is really important because we can take these practices and apply them into other farming worlds so that we can start to create more farms in other parts of the world that have a zero carbon footprint to bring down those greenhouse gases and help fight global warming, or just stave off what's already happening. So super cool to learn how farmers are dedicated to creating a green environment, not just for themselves, but for nature and the area around them, and how a lot of this can expand to other parts of not just the world, but other worlds of farming. And so, um, super awesome that we get to learn about Arturo Aguirre Sr. and Jr. and how they have dedicated their lives to creating a sustainable, uh, carbon neutral crop, and just making a livelihood off of it and showing how we can give back while being able to survive ourselves. So that's what today's coffee tasting is all about, is providing a cleaning up after ourselves, even when it comes to farming, and leaving the world the way we found it, or not even the way we found it, but leaving it better than what we found it for our future generations so that they have a world that they can live in. So, very important, you guys, you know, creating a community and an environment that is safe and friendly for the future generations that are to come, and using coffee and other farming practices to inspire us to create that green and friendly, eco-friendly environment. So thanks everyone for joining. I hope your coffee was just as delicious as mine was, and I will see you Tuesday as we explore another Stumptown coffee from Indonesia. So thanks again everyone for joining on today's coffee tasting. If you enjoyed today's tasting, go ahead and click the link down below. That is going to be a list of videos that I have done in the past. And then the video above is just going to be a video that YouTube thinks that you might like. Thanks again everyone for joining, and have a great day.